Hello and welcome to That Thing I Did for a Year, a podcast where we talk to University of Toronto fourth-year students about experiences they had in a year away from school. My name is Ilya. I'm a fourth-year industrial engineering student here at the University of Toronto, and today I'll be talking to Paul. Behind production and the mastermind behind the operation is Arkadia Hungarovsky, a fourth-year engineering science student. So, Paul, why don't you introduce yourself?
So hey everyone, my name is Paul. I guess I'm just first name. So I'm a fourth-year engineering science student at U of T. I specialized in mathematics, statistics, and finance. And for my PY, I did 16 months, actually 15, I think, at a consultancy called Zetas Associates. And so I did a lot of work there in Salesforce and marketing. And also while I was there, I did an internship, sort of fellowship thing, with a Google company called Sidewalk.
Sweet. So before we get into the stuff you got into over PY, what made you decide to go into engineering science?
So that was actually kind of an indecisive decision, because I knew with Eng Sci I'd get the 2 years of not choosing what I wanted to go into.
By just doing everything.
Exactly, yeah. And so out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I was like, what can I spend the most time on, but then still have like viable hiring options after? And so with that, I was like, oh, Eng Sci seems pretty cool. And in my first 2 years of Eng Sci, I actually was thinking of going into physics as well, because I felt that was another 2 years of, I can still kind of hedge my bets and go into anything after.
Why did physics feel that way?
That's a good question. I think it's because it's the way it's pitched almost. In the physics, you can do anything. You understand the numbers behind reality. And because of that, like, you build all these like numerical method skills that you can apply to kind of any other industry. But as I was thinking about it in second year, I actually was signed up to go into physics. And then the summer after second year, I was doing some research, and I realized that academia isn't something that I'm super keen on. And so I swapped, because I was actually listening to Planet Money at the time a whole bunch. And I'm like...
Planet Money being an economics podcast.
The NPR podcast, yeah. And I was like, oh, this stuff is really cool. This sort of like applied game theory, business stuff. I could see myself doing this. And so then I switched into math, stats, finance. And yeah.
This has been good?
It's been pretty good. I've learned that I'm not such a fan of finance, especially option pricing and that sort of thing. Just for me, I don't find that as compelling. And so I'm actually looking now, or not looking, but I am in the more businessy side, which is management consulting. And actually to that end, this year I took a lot of classes with you, a lot of the industrial engineering sort of stuff to kind of get my business management chops.
And we were very, very happy to have you. Was there anything that kind of indicated that you would be interested in business type things or consulting type things before you started getting into PY or anything like that?
That's a really good question. I guess it depends on the way that you look at consulting as a field. And so I know to some people, they think of it as just like a slog you're going to be in for 2 years and you'll exit to the client side.
Sure.
That's not the way that I've been looking at it. I think that really it's about high-level problem solving. And this is something that really attracted me to the field. And also kind of my other professional love of data science is something that's also kind of very much along that line. It's coming in and either taking in data science like tons and tons of data and other things and trying to make it actionable. Or in consulting, you take in data not quite of the same type, but you're still trying to kind of use that and transform it into something you can do. And so to me, I guess a sign of that is, as a kid, some of the games I played were very, very strategy intensive, and it was all about kind of getting into that like 99th percentile optimization. And that's something I've always enjoyed, and my brother actually commented about that over Christmas. He's like, I could tell you're going to go into this kind of field because of the games you always played.
What kinds of games?
So there's one called Path of Exile, and I'm not going to talk about Smash, like I said I wouldn't. But
You're very strong.
A lot of practice. But games where you're able to really, really kind of think outside of the game, so that aren't based on reaction time, but are based more on optimization and really kind of understanding the system in a deep way. And so a lot of like Diablo 2-esque RPGs, where it's very, very deep, and you can spend hours in a spreadsheet outside of the game optimizing things. I did that. I actually talked about that in my first year engineering design report. I was like, look at this cool spreadsheet I have. Look at my DPS. It's so good.
DPS is damage per second, and I think that's all the gaming terms will do. Okay, so that seems decently indicative. So what made you decide to go on PY then?
I felt like for me, PY wasn't really a decision. I would have needed a very compelling reason not to go.
Okay.
I'd gone to a lot of, when I still thought I was going into physics, I went to some seminars that were actually meant for physics grad students, and I was talking to them about why you should spend some time in industry before you go back to do a PhD. And the big reason they gave was just, the world works differently than you might think it does. I think that sounds right. Yeah. And so this was something I was like, okay, that makes sense. And that was definitely something I felt in PY. a lot of things don't work the way, especially as a very math engineering student, you have this kind of picture for how things function. You go out and you see it, and it's not always quite the way you think.
Right. So PY for you was a way to figure out what the world is actually like.
Yeah, and also to test the waters of this consulting thing, because I kind of learned that I didn't really enjoy the financy side of math stats finance, and so I was, okay, I can look at the kind of business and optimization side, and if that doesn't work out, there's also some classes in operations research that I found just very, very cool. Mm-hmm. So I knew that if the consulting if I just didn't like it for whatever reason, I could go into this kind of OR field, but I turned out to really like it. So I'm going back into it after graduation.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right, we'll talk about that in a bit. But what was your thought process behind what kinds of companies to apply for, and how did you go about applying for them?
So I went the way in third year of applying to, I think, only like 4 or 5 companies. But all of them, I knew that if I would get this, I would take it. So I really narrowed things down. And the ones that come to mind is there's ZS, there's TPG, where you worked, actually.
So that's the Poirier Group.
The Poirier Group, yeah. I applied to the Deloitte management consulting position as well, and I believe the BMO internal consulting one, and also actually the Ab InBev, the beer company. Mm-hmm. And so these were all things that I felt really aligned with that kind of operations research and consulting, and I ended up getting a few of those. And the reason I chose the ZS one was because of the way it was pitched. It was the Decision Analytics Associate, and so to me this was a way to kind of really test the waters of data science versus consulting. I had some projects which were very, very data intensive, and that was a really cool way to kind of flex my chops there. And then some that were much more soft skill business sort of stuff. And that was a great way to kind of weigh the scales and see, where do I actually want to go into? And my answer to that is kind of consulting, but sort of both. And so actually the company I'm going after graduation, BCG, they have a data science branch. And I'm taking some grad courses right now, or a single grad course, in machine learning, because I want to be able to transition to that work if it's something that I want to in the future. Yeah.
How did you gain experience or kind of explore your love of data science before consulting?
Extracurriculars is the big answer to that. There was a professor who was running a data science Kaggle team. Kaggle is this website where there's competitions that are posted by companies. They have like $100,000 prizes, but as a student, you're not going to win because people do this professionally.
So like they post data science challenges that they actually have, and they say like go at it, and if you solve it, they will pay you.
If you're the best one, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And so one of them we did was with this company called Outbrain. You may have actually, the ads you get on like Facebook or YouTube at the bottom are the banner ads. You may actually recognize the Outbrain logo. And so this challenge was based on all this data we have. Can you build a better like ad recommender system? So we built one that was okay. I think we were in like the top 15%. Mm-hmm. So not bad for students. Definitely didn't win any money. But that was a way for me to really start learning that this is something that I'm really interested in and that I know I want to do in potentially like an out of school capacity.
Gotcha. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense that this ZETA position combined consulting, which has the high-level strategy you were looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and the data science, which you had gotten to try.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first got to ZS, was it as you expected? Did it start living up to those expectations?
Yeah, I think so. I think that actually the first few months I had at ZS were very, very good. And the reason for that, I think, is because I was focused on a single project. And so some of the stuff we were doing there was looking at Salesforce deployment. So you have a product and you want to sell it across the country and you want to understand where do you put salespeople to maximize the revenue of this product. Mm-hmm. And so this was something that's interestingly like a bit of the data science in that it's very lightweight, like there's no ML stuff. But nonetheless, we have a data set and we're trying to parse through it to like pull insights out of it. And I felt doing that was really, really fun. And being focused on one thing I really liked because I could go very, very deep on it and really tease out some non-trivial insights. And even in the first few months, I got to work with fantastic people. And so that was really cool. Mm-hmm. The reason I differentiate the first few months is ZS is one of the companies that uses this fractional staffing policy, which is where you will work on 2 or more projects simultaneously. I think the record for me was 4, which is something that I ultimately found didn't really work for me as a person, just because I liked the consulting, the data science, because you could go really, really deep. You could draw these like really, really valuable insights out of the data. And when you're on 4 things at once, it kind of feels like you're taking 4 classes at once. You don't have that beautiful like insight into any of them because you're always just trying to put out the next fire or the next thing that's about to catch fire.
Right, you're like, do it the next day.
Exactly,
Like, just do the thing, do the thing, do the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
It's like always push, go, 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 go.
So, well, we'll get into that, but just to give some context, ZS is a consulting company, but do they have any specific focus? Like, what differentiates ZS? What do they do?
Yeah, so ZS is, they're not a boutique firm, really. They're quite a bit too big for that. They focus very heavily on Salesforce optimization and pharmaceuticals, and particularly the overlap between these 2 spaces.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. So, with respect to fractional staffing, was that something that happened gradually, or were you like, on one project, that went well, cool, tons of projects?
So it was 1 to 2. Nonetheless, though, that step is much more noticeable than 2 to 3,
Gotcha.
Or even 2 to 4. It was the difference between I'm able to like really dive in and own something and become not like I'd say passionate about it, because when you kind of do anything enough and you become good enough at it, I find you become passionate, versus doing 2 things where they're both kind of pulling you different directions, and because of that you're not able to get that same level of depth. And it's also tough when in my experience, it was 2 different managers on these. And so because of that, you're kind of trying to appease both of them at the same time, but stuff comes up and it's tough. And communication is like the way to make that happen well. But nonetheless, it's something that I just didn't find clicked with me that well.
Gotcha. Do you think that the whole fractional staffing and being on tons of stuff at the same time is something that's endemic to consulting? Or
no.
Okay.
So the firm I'm going to after graduation, I was particularly interested in because BCG, McKinsey, and Bain all do not do this. So with them, you're on a single project for, I think at the low end, even several weeks, up to about 6 months. And because of that, you can really get that deep domain expertise. And I was talking to somebody at one of these networking events, and he was definitely very, very pro this stance. And he was saying, like, he'd been doing a due diligence project, and he learned all about the price of drywall. Okay. And he was in the cab, and the cab driver was talking about something about housing prices or something. And the consultant's like, you know what, actually, it's drywall prices that drive a lot of these things. And it's like that's what I want. I think that's so cool, to dive so deep and to have these kind of like glance behind the curtain sort of feelings.
Right.
Versus the just, I have everything on fire. I need to do all these things right now.
Do you think that being able to be on this bunch of different projects, even if you don't have that same level of deep insight, makes more sense in an internship? Or would you still have preferred to be on a smaller number of more intense, deeper projects?
On an internship, it was fantastic.
Okay.
And I don't want to sound like I'm bashing ZS, because it's a fantastic company. It's just, I found that myself, I like getting a little bit deeper. But no, it was fantastic. I actually got to kind of run the gamut and touch on everything a little bit. And so I did some of their core kind of pharmaceutical and sales work, some sales but not pharmaceuticals, pharmaceuticals but not sales, not pharmaceutical, not sales, and kind of every flavor in there. And so I think I did about 15 projects in the 15 months I was there.
Wow, that's a lot.
No, it was really fun. It was really cool. And there were some that were fantastic and some that were, none that were bad, some that were just like, it was a project.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you come into at the beginning of every one of these projects, or would you sometimes insert it in the middle?
Most of the time it was at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of them had probably a 2 to 3-ish month runtime, but you would expect that it's going to have maybe 2-3 weeks in the middle that are very intense, and then a bit of kind of introduction and kind of finalization that are a bit lighter, and that's a lot of kind of passings to the client, kind of polishing up things here and there. But it's really spiked in the middle.
Gotcha. So when you were brought in on these projects, it sounds like you were able to go through quite a few of them from start to finish. I think a lot of people would be interested to know, what does a consulting project look like from start to finish, at least at ZS? Right,
yeah. So I think the answer to that varies so heavily depending on where you kind of are in the organization. And so coming in as an intern, you are going to be an associate. And at ZS, I can't give them enough credit for this. You're treated like an actual day one associate. So there's intern on your title, but nobody treats you like that, and they will forget after honestly 2 months. And so you come in and you're expected to work hard. But to me, that's no issue. I think to most people in engineering, that's no problem. But it's really, really cool because you're given ownership for things pretty much right off the bat. And so I think by week one and a half was familiarizing myself with the tools, learning a lot of the cool Excel shortcuts. And then after that, it was, okay, Paul, here's a data set. Can you use the standard practice that we use to kind of draw these insights from it? And this was, week 2. I had actual stuff that I did, and then I made a few slides about it, and I showed it to one of the managers on this project. And then he was like, oh, that's pretty good. Let's change things up. And I think by week 4, I had made a slide that had gone through the process and was then presented to not quite, I think one tier below C-suite of the client organization by week 4. And so that is, I think, pretty standard consulting, where it's just like super, not sink or swim, but you get into it, it's very fast, and then you immediately get that kind of the feedback from other people. And so within even 4 or 6 weeks, you're able to present to people who are many years into their career at the client organization, which I found just amazing.
That's awesome. We're going to get into more of like kind of your thoughts on consulting, like your time at ZS, and maybe some more specifics. But we're going to take a quick break now, and we'll be right back with more with Paul Seufert. Hey guys, Ilya here. Hope you're enjoying the show. So Arkady and I wanted to start doing this thing where we shout out initiatives on campus that we don't think get enough love. So the first thing that we wanted to shout out was Gift of Education. Gift of Education is a nonprofit that was started by Jessie Diep, who's currently an Indy 1T8, and she started it with her friend Priya. So Gift of Education has this goal of providing education with a 3-pronged approach to underprivileged children, both at home and abroad. And the way they do it is really cool. They hire students like me and you as tutors, and they provide really low-cost tutoring to students who need it around the GTA. And any proceeds they get go towards charities in order for children at home and abroad to receive an education. So I think what they're doing is super cool. It's awesome to have a classmate who is like starting a genuine nonprofit is making a huge difference. If you want to check them out, find giftofeducation.ca or hit up Jessie Diep online. Let's get back to the show. And we're back with Paul. So you mentioned a couple of things that you were into before you went into consulting, like data science, high-level thinking, all that. And you also mentioned that consulting has quite a quick uptake and like a lot that you need to learn. So it doesn't sound like one of those jobs that you can come into just complete blank slate. So what do you think are skills or attributes that people should have or the students should have before going into consulting?
So I think the biggest thing for consulting is not the technical side. It's all the soft stuff. And that's not to say you can't learn it, like they're soft skills for a reason. But I know a lot of people who during the interview process kind of had some tripping points around when the interviewer tells you or asks you to tell them a story. So tell me about a time that you ... And I think being able to answer those questions fairly concisely is a massive sieve they use on potential candidates. And so what they're looking for, and in consulting there's the 80-20 rule, which did Andrew talk about that?
I'm not sure. Please let him know. Yeah.
So 80-20 is the idea that for most things, 80% of the outcome you want can be attained with about 20% of the effort. And so if you kind of tactically decide where to apply force or whatever, you can really get most of the result with a minimum amount of effort.
So this is like looking at the rubric.
Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. It's like realizing, if I write my name, that's 10 marks out of 100. That's probably one of the things worth doing versus if I have 18 citations, that's 5 marks. Maybe not. And so it's playing to win and recognizing that your time is far from unlimited. And so that's one of the big things. And they love to see you demonstrating that in the interview. And I say in the interview because I think in consulting, the interview process is definitely hyped up a lot.
There's a lot mythologized beyond belief.
Oh yeah. And it can be scary. Yeah, but the whole point of it is they're not trying to trip you up. They're not trying to make you look like a fool. They're just trying to see, could you function in this kind of high pressure environment, and could you, like I was saying, in the 4 or 6 weeks, really become an expert enough in something that you can present to somebody who's been doing this for 20 years and not be left out of the room. And so a part of that is 80-20, knowing where do I apply my effort to learn quickly. And I'd say that's different from just being a fast learner, because fast learner doesn't really mean anything. I feel like that's more of an attribute, less of a skill. Whereas this is it doesn't matter how raw horsepower you are, you need to be able to prioritize.
Right. It's not about dumping the entire textbook into your brain. It's about saying which chapters are important.
Exactly. Especially if I have 2 nights to learn this and I'm going to be presenting on Thursday. How do I make this work? Right. So that's one thing they're looking for. And the way this, I think, manifests in the interview is if, let's say they say, you're running a burger joint, let's think of some ways to increase revenue. We've been struggling recently. You can say, you know what? Let's start charging people for individual salt packets. But you think about that, okay, I can maybe charge 2 cents for a salt packet. You do the math and it's, this will maybe make me an extra $1,000 a month. Is that worth kind of antagonizing customers, going through the administrative, versus introducing another new menu item? So it's understanding the kind of the bigger picture and what are the other options I have here, and does this make sense given the effort it takes? So I'd say that's the one thing that is a little bit different, because in school, especially a lot of people in engineering, like myself included, we're pretty keen. And so we want to get that like 100%, that victory royale. And so you're really used to kind of going through everything and going into it in exhaustive depth, but it's learning when to say, this is probably enough, let's move on. So then I think the second thing is the pyramid principle, which you've heard this before probably. But the idea is that you can speak like a newspaper. And this is, you put the most important thing first. You put the second most important thing second. And the idea is that no matter where you stop in the article, you've read all the most important things up to this point. And so when you write an email like this, it's very clear when somebody understands this principle. So for example, subject letter or subject line, help, Excel not working. First line, here's my problem, like at a high level, and then more details, versus project delays happening, giving some like kind of background detail, and then only line 15 is there the actual, by the way, my Excel stopped working. And a great way to do that is in bold as well. If you're writing emails, just your subject line or your first line is important, bold it. People their eyes are drawn to that. And the way this comes across in an interview kind of, I guess I'm being a little long-winded here, which is against the point, but it's when they ask you to tell them a story, and you can very concisely tell them, this is what matters, and this is why it matters, but in that order. Not of, one time when I was 5 years old, I was fishing, and the rhyme,
Right.
Yeah, that's a sign for them that even if you're a fantastic speaker, you don't have the communication polish that they're looking for.
That makes sense. So it sounds like it comes down to like being able to prioritize in communications, and like
time management.
Yeah, time management. It sounds like they're looking for somebody where they're like, are you credible enough that we could stick you in front of a client? Because that's what you're going to be doing.
I really like that word too, credible. I think that works in a few other ways as well. Like there's the whole mythologization.
Nice.
Is that it? Yeah, nice. Nailed it. Okay. Of mental math and consulting interviews too. And it's true. Like it looks snappy, but the real test there is, again, are you going to embarrass yourself in front of the client? Have you hit the threshold for, you can do math that's not hard. It's like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, maybe squaring. I've never seen it.
Sure.
But yeah, it's doing these things up to a threshold that you're not going to embarrass yourself. And It's the same thing for like your kind of base technical skills. They expect you to have a little bit, at least at ZS, a bit of Excel. I did like a tiny bit of Python, not really. But just up to the point where you can learn. Like, do you have this kind of fundamental basis?
Which you probably do just by virtue of having been an engineer.
Oh, exactly. I'd say all the engineering students, like you have no issues on that side.
That's more like something where they're worried about it if they're taking on a business student or somebody who's coming from more of a soft skills heavy background.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And so in this case, because we come from a hard skills, you need to kind of show you have those soft skills. So can you talk to a question? Do you make eye contact when you're talking? Not constantly and creepy, but like, dude, are you agreeable? Are you a nice person? Like, could they have a beer with you? Which isn't always a threshold and not pro alcohol or anything, but just could they spend an afternoon with you? There's actually, what's it called?
Airport test.
Airport test. Yes. Yeah. If I was in an airport with this person for 5 hours, could I stand it?
Right.
And this is from the second you walk into the office until you leave. It's just, are you bearable?
Right.
Because like, that might happen. There's a lot of flying consulting. You might be stuck in an airport with this person. Would it be okay?
We'll speak to the travel and consulting in a second, but on the flip side, like you've talked about what you think is important for like kind of getting into the field. What do you think are the most important things or the most valuable things that you've learned from being a consultant thus far?
Right. Yeah. So one of the really interesting things that I've seen as a consultant is, and we've talked about this before a little bit, the world, I don't want to say is on fire.
It's on fire.
It's amazing that as a civilization, humankind has gotten this far. It blows my mind, some of the stuff you see. And these are businesses that they make big money. And you see it, and it's, how have you gotten this far without using these like basic things? I don't want to give any examples.
Of course.
But there's some things that are just, I don't understand how this has gotten so far. And this actually comes back to what I was saying as a very sort of tech-oriented or a data-oriented person. Going into the business world, this is something I was surprised by. I thought that it would be much more kind of analytically rigorous, and when it wasn't, I was a little disappointed. But kind of to counter that, and a bit of a positive, is I came to respect the amazing power of human intuition. There was one project where we looked at, for salespeople over regions, what should their sales goal be? And the reason that's a big question is let's say you're selling like toothbrushes. If your goal is to do 1.5 million in sales in the next 2 months, that's absurd. Why would I even try? If it's to do $300, that's so little, I'll hit it and then I'll stagnate. And there's kind of a sweet spot in there. There's a Goldilocks zone. And so it was based on a bunch of variables. How do you calculate what this number should be? And this is for payment and compensation, so it really matters. And so the way they were doing it is they had somebody who had been doing this for 20 years and just had a feeling, oh, Frank did great last year, let's boost it 5%. Right. And it was all intuition driven. So we took a step back, we built this huge model that had like all these factors involved, and then in the end we compared the two, and it was like plus or minus 5-10% in most cases.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's better because now it's robust against if this person leaves.
Have you read this book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell?
No, I just read Outliers by him.
Okay, so there's slight plug. There's a great author named Malcolm Gladwell, and he wrote a book called Blink on the power of human intuition, and on when it's great and when it's not so great. And one incredible example he gives is a while back when male and female chicks, like the baby chickens, were being sorted by hand because like they go to different parts of the farm, and they're physically identical. There's nothing where you could realistically say, without like going really, really deep into it, what differentiates a male chick from a female chick. And the way it was done was just over time, some experienced farmers or people who were like on chicken farms learned to differentiate between them intuitively, and then they would train other people by just watching them sort, and whenever they make a mistake, go like, no, that wasn't right. And that was it. And within 3 weeks or something, these people were sorting with 99% accuracy without having any idea why.
Of how they're doing it.
You couldn't, if you asked them, they couldn't tell you why they say that one's a male or a female chick. They say, it just feels like it. And then they would do the thing. But it is terrifying to think that large swaths of our world and our society are based on this kind of level of human intuition. We're like, and then it moves on, especially given that we're in engineering and we are like very used to thinking like this is how rigorously everything works. And to be fair, not to dump on that. We should have more of that. But it's, as you said, it's amazing that it's not all broken.
And it's also I came into PY thinking, oh, we're like 20, 25 years from singularity. I am much less sure of that now.
So singularity, could you explain what that is?
Being the sort of kind of AI, I'll call it like the renaissance for artificial intelligence. It's once they get good enough, they start self-improving and humanity becomes effectively obsolete.
Once machines make other better machines.
At such a speed, like not over the 10-year time scale, but over like we're talking the microsecond sort of thing. So they evolve so quickly that then nothing you can do could compete with what they do. Right. So that's the point where everybody doesn't just become unemployed, they become unemployable.
Right. Because why would you employ them when you have an internally and immediately improving machine? Yeah. Okay. So coming into PY, you thought that's like 20, 25 years, we're good. I don't need to make long-term career plans.
I mean, I wasn't quite as much of a doomsday prepper as that.
Could be good.
Yeah.
but not as much of a doomsday proponent.
Yeah, no, but I definitely was aware that, okay, like, there are advancements, stuff might be happening, and because I had this view that, like, exactly everything is so technically rigorous, it's only going to take not that much additional, like, kind of advancements in AI to really start doing a lot of these things automatically. Right. Oh my God, no. So much of it is human intuition, and like to the soft skills point, a lot of it is human interaction. And right now, because of the uncanny valley, AI is not very good at that. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
Another interesting thing to discuss, because we're already discussing interesting things. So the uncanny valley is this idea that when something almost but doesn't quite imitate another thing, we're made very uncomfortable by it. So this is why we might be made very uncomfortable by a creepily realistic mannequin.
Yeah, that's why Slenderman's creepy. And all those other sort of elongated forms that are not quite right. It's because they're almost, whereas like WALL-E is cute. Right. Because it has human characteristics, but it's still, it's a gulf, yeah. Like kind of.
He's not trying to say like this thing's a person.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and the way this applies to AI is just that until it perfectly resembles a human, the fact that it's a little bit off makes it very, very off for us.
And so in business, you're not going to want to have a AI salesperson. Sure, you can have AI sales support. That's great. We already have that, I think, a little bit.
But they loudly announce that they're robots.
Yeah, or they're not the thing interfacing with the customer. There's a person there who has a laptop and other stuff and other systems, but yeah, it's not full AI.
Gotcha.
Not yet.
It's cool that that's something that came to your mind as you were working in Salesforce and pharmaceuticals consulting. You mentioned also kind of like the traveling side of consulting. That's also talked about. How was that, at least in your experience?
So for me at ZS, there's this kind of like prototypical model of the consultant who flies off Monday morning, comes back Thursday night.
Right.
And so that wasn't how it worked at ZS. Because of the fractional staffing we talked about, you generally work in the office, which was great. Like a lot of the coworkers, or really everybody there was fantastic. And so it was nice you got to be there. But then once in a while, probably once every 2-3 weeks maybe, you end up going to the client site. This is when you're presenting something and like WebEx is fun. Everyone loves people asking like, oh, who's that who joined? But
WebEx being like a web conferencing platform. It's like Skype, Skype, but you pay for it. Yeah,
it's like Skype, but better maybe.
Yeah. Skype, but sold. Anyway,
yeah, seriously.
So
Skype, but on the phone. So sometimes you need to go in and actually like interface face to face. So that was fun. So in that case, we would fly off. And for me, that meant Montreal. I think not exclusively, maybe exclusively.
You went to Montreal a bunch?
I went to Montreal a bunch, yeah. Because a lot of the Canadian pharmaceutical headquarters are up in Montreal. So I would take the kind of red eye out of Billy Bishop. And it was nice. If you've never flown Porter, I'd recommend it.
It's flying refined.
It is flying refined, yeah.
That was, I mean, it just sounds like a different kind of commute.
Yeah, and that was generally you go up for a day or two. There was one case I did like a 1 day there and back. It's cool. It's an experience. And honestly, it's not that overwhelming. So for me, actually, I was a terrible flyer as a kid. I had to have tons of gravel. I would still kind of lose my lunch. It was awful. And I was really worried about that coming into consulting. Like, how am I going to deal with this? And honestly, it was something that I kind of trained myself against. I remember we had our first flight at ZS was actually down to Chicago for a training session. And on the way there, it was like a 2-hour flight. I had my head down the whole way. I was like, oh, this is so bad. Oh, my God. Then on the way back, I was thinking, you know what? This is probably mostly placebo. Because I haven't flown for 5-6 years before that. And so I was saying, you know what? I'm just going to see how long I can sit up for. And then I was sitting up for most of the flight back. I was like, oh, this is fine. And then from then on, I just kind of would try to train myself, which sounds kind of silly. This is a very kind of simple thing for a lot of people. But then by the end of it, I could work on my laptop on the plane, which was like the holy grail. And I wasn't quite as productive as I would be at my desk, but we're talking like 60% effectiveness maybe.
Okay.
Which is nice, yeah.
A lot better than zero.
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool. Was living away from home or being away from home for extended periods of time something that was like positive or negative for you?
It feels like a bit of an adventure sometimes. So that's, I think, a positive in that way. I have some friends who are at BCG right now, and one of them, he was doing some work in Mexico City. So for him, it was the kind of 4 days a week he's there. And while he was there, it sounded like just, so much fun. You're staying at a nice hotel. You get to sort of see the sights and really engage with it. And you're also there to work on this fascinating problem. So to me, it sounds like an adventure. There's also capacity, though, if you're not as travel-oriented. You can request, like, hey, are there any things in the kind of the immediate vicinity I can do? And so being in Toronto, that's awesome because most Canadian companies are headquartered here. And I was actually, when I was talking to BCG about some stuff, they were saying that in terms of requesting projects, there's kind of 3 axes to do it on. One of them is the location, the second is the industry, and the third is the project type. And so if you say, I want to do a mining project in Spain that's looking at long-term investment, so that's all 3, they're probably not going to be able to get you that. If you just say, I want something in Spain, I don't care what it is, that's very doable, like 90% of the time.
They probably have several projects in Spain.
Exactly, yeah. So if you just say, I want to do always in Toronto, I'm open to both other things, you will get it. Like pretty much 100% of the time.
Just because these companies have enough projects floating around that will work for you. Right. Just like in my personal experience, not as much of a thing at a boutique consulting firm, just by virtue of the fact that you don't have as many just different projects that fill all of these criteria floating around. And also just more kind of an all hands on deck environment. It's like, it's not, it's not like, what would I like to work on? It's like, oh my God, work on these 5 things.
What do I need to work on?
Exactly. Work on these 5 things for yesterday. That's really, so you would travel for a different reason, but we'll get into that in a second. Over the summer, you picked up another pursuit.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about Sidewalk?
So I was one of the 12 Sidewalk Toronto Fellows, and so just a little background on the project itself. There is a new neighborhood being developed down by the eastern waterfront called Quayside, and so right now it's only 12-14 acres, but what's really interesting about it is it's actually being really dealt with by an alphabet company. So this is a sister company to Google called Sidewalk, and they're really interested in really reinventing the way we do urban design, using technology and all sorts of much more modern insights.
So very like smart city of the future vibe.
Yeah. Like that's exactly it. And for me, this was something that was really, really cool because I had actually done research in urban design before. And I looked at transportation networks and stuff like that.
So in terms of research, you mean like you did research with a professor at the University of Toronto?
Yes. So this was in my summer after second year. And it was a great experience. I learned that research is just a little bit slow for me. I tend to like go. And that's not what happens in research. So I like to go deep. Research is too deep.
Right. So, but you were nevertheless drawn to Sidewalk.
Yeah. Because this is something that I'm just fascinated by, like the scale of things that happen in cities. Because you work on business transformation projects, and it's like multiple millions of dollars, which is crazy as an intern, being like, oh, this is like a $50 million saving. Like, that's insane. But then you get to cities, and $50 million is like, okay, so
pennies.
What? Yeah, exactly. Like, who cares? And that's what I find just amazing. And there's so many different stakeholders, and there's so many systems that are like all overlapping. I just think that's fantastic. And I went into the Sidewalk project kind of framing myself around that. How do large systems interact in the cities? And I actually ended up falling in love with a totally separate aspect of cities. And so I actually worked a lot on public spaces and what it means. Because I came into it, and I said this when we were presenting it to the Sidewalk people, but I was like, public spaces are,
right.
You put them in as a developer to satisfy the city.
By public spaces, you mean things like parks?
Parks, yeah, and other sort of public amenities. But over the course of what we saw, and a lot of kind of research papers that were shown to us, is that no, public spaces actually are so much more important to not just neighborhood fabric, but also to economic viability, to all of these other things. And just one quick example, when we were in New York, there's Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is beautiful. It's on the Bronx side, Brooklyn side, sorry, of the Brooklyn Bridge, and there are actually condos on the park. And the thing, though, is that these are multi-million-dollar, like, market value properties. But the way it works is the money that was raised through those was then plugged back into the park itself. So all of and it's a beautiful thing. There's tennis courts. There's massive, like, covered playground structures. Like, it's an unbelievable sort of thing. It feels like a private school, the level of investment there. But it's all driven from this market value property sale. And so that was something that I saw, and I'm like, wow, this sort of tax increment financing and all this value capture, like, that's so cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's something that's completely invisible to most people who are living in the city and actually using that space.
Yeah.
So as like taking a small step back, so you got into this program as a Sidewalk fellow, and you mentioned that you studied these things, you read research papers, you went to New York to look at these public spaces and whatnot. What was the impetus for Sidewalk to actually have this fellowship program, and what did you guys do? What was your goal?
So the impetus of that was they were looking to really get maximum public engagement on this project. And the fellows program, so there were 12 of us, and we were all between 19 and 25. And the reason they had that particular range was because they found that in public engagement, so round tables, things like that, we tend to be underrepresented, we being students and young professionals. 18 or younger tend not to have anything to say about this kind of stuff, I guess. And ages above this will actually show up to public engagement. But we were pretty silent as a demographic. And so they set up this program for us to travel and to meet with a lot of people and developments that were similar to what was happening in Quayside. And the ultimate deliverable of this was a report. And so this is actually available online. It's a beautiful PDF. It's, I think, 70-ish pages. And it's the kind of nice Google styling. Yeah, take a look if you haven't.
Where would you find it?
It is on the Sidewalk Toronto website. There's links to it. If you just Google Sidewalk Toronto Fellows Report, you'll find it.
Okay, we'll link it in the episode description.
Yeah, perfect. It's not hard to find. But so ultimately we weren't just writing a report for the report's sake. It was really to give our sort of demographics unique view on the development itself. So what should it be? What should it not be? And if you've been following, or if you've heard any of the Sidewalk stuff in the news, you know that's the point that's been emphasized. The data collection, this is not what we want in Toronto. And I totally agree with those voices on a lot of things. And so I think it was a fantastic opportunity, not only to experience and get to write, but also to really dive deep into this issue and kind of understand the policy, public relations interplay.
What did you think was the biggest difference between working in the public policy space versus the private, corporation enterprise space?
It's not all about money. It was funny, actually. I was talking to one of the other fellows, and she was saying that when I first saw you, I was like, I'm not going to like that guy. Because I sort of pitched myself as, the large-scale systems, but also the economic viability and the financials and all that stuff. And, it's still very important, and I'm a very strong believer that social like impact organizations, they should aim to be financially viable, because that's when, if you're self-propagating, then it's like you can do so much more. Nonetheless, though, it's not all about turning a profit. That was what I found so interesting about public spaces, is that it's something that is so, overlooked by me, maybe by other people too, but it has all these wide-ranging impacts on like public health and da-da-da-da-da. And that was something that I thought was the sort of biggest difference. I guess the second one is going to be number of stakeholders. So if you're working in a financial or in a business context, there's probably the client organization, maybe their customers, maybe, but generally you can count the number of stakeholders on one, maybe two hands. Try to do that. You need a lot of hands.
Right.
Yeah. It's pretty much everybody in the city kind of is a stakeholder in some way, and you can start bucketing them into like different demographic groups or what have you. But nonetheless, it's such a balancing act in many ways.
Right.
And I found that just very interesting as well.
Right. It sounds like it's a lot harder to move things forward, especially given just the scale and infrastructure of a city like Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was that something that was like frustrating for you, or did you like tussling with that kind of thing?
So we were working on a recommendation, so we're not actually building the buildings, obviously. And so for us, that wasn't something that we had to deal with as much. We were very aware, though, because we traveled to Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Vancouver, Toronto, obviously Toronto, New York, and Boston. And in Europe, so in Copenhagen and Amsterdam, we were struck by the level of public control or government control over these things. In Amsterdam, I believe it's something 85 to 90% of the land in the city is owned by the city. Yeah,
wow.
It's shocking, yeah.
So they actually have like a lot more top-down control over what happens in the city.
Yeah, they can just say, this is now for this, and we will put the money in, or you want to build on our land? Great, you do it. And there was some very interesting examples of that, versus in Toronto, we don't have that. Layered onto that as well is the tax structure. It's very different here than in Scandinavia.
In that they tax more.
Yes. They have so much more money for this kind of stuff.
Right.
And also, as a city, in Canada, there's much less power than the provincial level, as we saw with Doug Ford trying to snip up the Toronto
City Council.
Exactly, yeah. So there's a number of other factors we had to consider when doing this. And so a lot of the answers, and we do actually have a whole section on policy, which I think is beautifully written, but a lot of the answers we tried to come up with avoided that sort of, this needs to be implemented sort of Communist Party of China style top down.
Sure.
And everybody else's opinions don't matter because this is what's right for the people. We try to avoid that. I'm very much a believer in when people want to do something for their own reasons, they will do it so much better. So in an argument, don't say, you need to do this for me, you owe me. No. Say, do this for yourself. It'll benefit me, sure, but this is how it's going to help you.
Right.
And I think kind of looking through that lens at the way to design cities is, I think, going to bear a lot more fruit.
That's really cool. And actually, that makes me really want to read that report. So you said you hit like 6 cities that weren't Toronto, like 5 or 6?
6, yeah. 6 with Malmo in Sweden, yeah.
Right. And that's over the course of a summer.
Yeah.
Okay. You were still working at ZS.
I was, yeah. So I was finishing up at ZS at the end of July, and I had a bunch of vacation time accrued. And I talked to my manager and everything, and I said, hey, is it okay if I take this time off and everything? And I ultimately got it waived, so it was great. But yeah, it was definitely combining that with fractional staffing. It was a little sketchy.
Right.
I don't know if I definitely, like, I love doing the fellowship. I do it again in a heartbeat. I think I may have just finished my time at ZS in end of June versus end of July.
Right.
So that was, yeah, that's something that maybe I could have played a little bit better. But
is that because like you describing like this life where you're like, oh my God, all of these things I like, but just not enough time for me to properly do or do justice to or really dig into and enjoy like every one of them. I mean, that sounds just like story of my life at school every year, just long back as I can remember. Was that some like a way you felt before going into PY, or was that something new for you?
That's a really good question, because I kind of lived that same life at school. Like, oh, multiple clubs. Yeah, sure, I'll do this. I'll volunteer for this. Then on PY, school and work are different. There was, I think this is actually a quote from you from a few days ago, but it's like the worst thing, or one of the worst things school teaches you is that procrastination works. Yeah.
yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And that was something that I definitely felt, especially in NSci, where it has this mythos of, oh, it's so scary. Only like, you can only get through it if you're super smart,
Yeah.
And then if you kind of slack on things and then you really like rush to catch up and you procrastinate and you still end up doing okay, it builds this like false confidence in your head that, oh, the world is actually pretty easy.
Right.
No. It's because at school, it's in many ways designed for you to be able to do that.
Right.
I talked to my thesis supervisor about a grad course, the grad course I'm taking, and I asked her, hey, is there any advice you have for this? And what she said was really interesting. It's that grad courses treat you like adults, whereas undergrad courses treat you like children, in that the structure of most undergrad courses with deliverables and the timing of tests and everything is designed so that stress can get you through, so that you can put things off till 2 days before the test and still do okay.
Right.
Or the project or whatever, you can do it in one night if you really have to. Whereas in grad courses, you will have a 3-month project with no check-ins. And if you start with 2 weeks left, you will fail.
Yeah. And that's on you.
That's on you, yeah. And that was, I think, the way the business world or the real world runs as well. You're expected to be an adult. You're expected to be able to kind of self-moderate and get things done in a reasonable way instead of kind of leaving everything for the last minute and then it's, oh my God, what's happening? And this was something I struggled with at the beginning of fractional staffing, and I definitely got better with it over time. But it was the school technique of, oh, there's a deliverable for this due in 2 weeks, but there's something due for my other project in 2 days. Let's focus fire on that one. Mm-hmm. And then it's done, and then, the next few days they're not as intense. I can work the normal kind of like 9 to 5, like, it's great. And then the next week it happens again, like, oh my God, I have something due. I need to spend 2, not all-nighters, but like long days. And that's just not sustainable. You need to balance it out and really just, moderate your time a bit better, because it's very different from school.
Did that kind of pressure of, I can't, cramming doesn't work, did that lead to some, significant lows? Or was that one of those things where you were like, in hindsight, could have done it differently?
I'm a pretty positive person, so I think definitely part of that, it's, I can do things differently, but it's fine. But no, there definitely were some times where, I ended up actually pulling, an all-nighter to get something done. And that was non-ideal. I know that I'm willing to work hard, and I can push and I can get things done, but you shouldn't, if you need to put Herculean effort into something, you're probably not doing it the right way.
Right.
Is something that I learned from that, yeah. So in hindsight, I would definitely understand more about things, and honestly, the simplest thing you can do is, if you're working with data, when you get the data, spend an hour, open it up, and go through it and check what you have, because what these all-nighters would end up happening is, I assumed I had what I needed. I would then, it's due tomorrow, fine, it'll take me 4 hours. Start doing it, and you're like, oh no, this field I thought I had, it's not there. I need to find a way to kind of reverse engineer.
Sure.
And it's, oh my God, that's going to take 4 more hours. And then it's the kind of accumulating, it's like an avalanche of tasks.
Right.
There's so much more stuff you didn't even know you had to do.
Yeah.
And no matter how well you plan it, if your assumption of what you have and what you actually have are not aligned, you're in for a bad time.
And you don't have time to fix it. You don't have time to reach out to the guy who's pulling the data saying, hey, can I get a different data set?
Exactly.
You don't have any time to do anything like that.
It's 9 p.m. on Thursday night, the day before it's due. Or not even, due is the wrong word, because that implies that it's some other, I think, high-level authority who's ultimately the only one inconvenienced. No, it's in business. I don't know if there's a better word off the top of my head for it, but this is when it's required. It needs to be done for this day.
Right.
In some cases, there was companies that were doing rollouts of a product. They needed their sales alignment by this day. And luckily, it wasn't those ones where I had the issue with, right when I started fractional staffing. Because that would have been, I'd pull 2 all-nighters back-to-back to get that done. So my advice on that is check that you have what you need. You might think, this will take me 2 hours. Start doing the first hour. If you're halfway done, great. Then you can put it to the side. If you're not, now you have a much better understanding of what this will actually take to get done.
Right, but kind of address the unknown risks as early as possible.
Exactly, yeah.
That makes sense. Is that something that you think you've taken in with you into the 4th year of school?
I think so. I'm doing better now than I ever have been, GPA-wise, so I'm like, something's working. So that's nice. I think so. I'd like to think so. I'm a little bit more disciplined in terms of I keep a very detailed to-do list now, and every morning I sit down and I'm like, okay, what do I not understand well enough? And I will shift that around. So on my thesis, it's always okay, what data do I have? Open it up. Oh, of course, it's not what I thought it was. Wow, thanks, City of Toronto. No, I'm kidding, they're great. But it's understanding that and then being able to reach out for help instead of just I need to carry this weight on my own. That's a bad feeling.
Right.
Don't do that.
That makes sense. Gotcha. Was there anything else in terms of what you got up to over PEY that has informed what you get up to now in 4th year?
A little bit, yeah. So I was working with the data science team, and so we ran some workshops for people, kind of introduction to machine learning, and that's something that actually you and I are both working on. Maybe this weekend, we'll see. So that was something that, just continuing with my interest in data science. Another thing would be I was involved with the U of T Consulting Association, and so we worked with a nonprofit, and that was one of the things where it helped me with consulting, and consulting helped me with it, because it was building an Excel-based tool for them. And so coming from consulting, it's like, okay, not just like the interview prep, but actually having done the work there, you understand at a much more detailed level, what does it mean for the client to have uncertainty? Because I remember the first meeting, they told us, oh, we're looking for this thing. And I immediately sort of raised my eyebrows, like, I'm not convinced that's what you actually want. So we spent the first 2 weeks really going back and framing it with them and saying, this is what you've asked for. Are you sure? And that was up until I actually started consulting. That's something I never would have done. Because you get the assignment, that's the assignment.
Right, but that's a very school thing.
Exactly, yeah. It's like you're a student, your job is to complete the task given. That is not always the case in the real world.
It's sometimes very rarely the case.
Exactly, yeah. And so this was one of the cases where, having learned that you can push back, you can say, there might be a better way to do this. That helped me immensely. And the product we delivered, they loved it, they're super happy. And I'm continuing to work with them, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so that sounds awesome, but it also sounds like that questioning was like led to significantly increased level of happiness, and they might not even have been as happy even if you delivered exactly on what they initially said they wanted.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because what they initially said they wanted, it was like a symptom, not the cause, sort of thing. Yeah, and you hear about that all the time, and like get to the root cause.
Yeah.
And this was like the sort of type of thinking that it's easy to say, it's a bit harder to actually live.
Right.
And so having practiced that in work like that helped me immensely. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were going to be like working at BCG, like coming out of school. What else do you think? Like how did you decide to like apply to that company and like go to that company? And yeah, like how was that informed by your time over PY?
So I mentioned this before about the kind of depth and focus of the consulting firm. So that was something that I knew I wanted. I wanted to be able to focus on one thing for kind of 4 to 6 months and really build that level of expertise. So that was one thing. So I knew it was McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and a few others up there, but those were the ones that I was really interested in. And what drew me to BCG in particular is they take a bit more than the other two. Like they all do this very much, but they're a little bit more known for their sort of first principles approach to things, which is when the client has a problem, and instead of whipping out a framework and just applying that, they think, okay, let's take a step back. Like, let's really evaluate this in almost like a physicist sort of way. And this is something I know, yeah, I wanted to go into physics. And that was something that I thought was really, really cool. And so, yeah, so they were like my number one, and then I interviewed there and I got it. I was like, okay, awesome, let's go. And so, yeah, no, I'm super excited for that next year. And maybe we'll have another episode then after.
I'll leave that probably to another individual.
A follow-up podcast. I think I'm doing for the rest of my life.
Follow-up. That's good. That's good. That needs to be written down. So we're getting to the end of our time here, but I wanted to ask you this because you've talked about a lot about like the learnings you've had over the course of PY. If you can look back over those like 16 months, what might you have changed?
For me, it's really the time management. Get good at that early. And like, this isn't something you need to struggle with by yourself. Let your manager or whoever the person at your PY is who's helping you, let them know, hey, this is something I would really like to improve on. It doesn't have to be time management, but coming from school, the procrastination thing, it's probably time management. So identify what it is and work through it in a structured way with the team there, because that'll be so much more helpful than kind of struggling at it alone and having some things that don't go great before you kind of get up to speed. Just try to avoid that not go great phase. Just, yeah, be honest about it so people know that you need support.
Right.
I know something that I struggle with sometimes is that I sound very confident all the time. I'm very agreeable. And
That's
so
quite the first world problem right there,
I
Paul.
know, yeah. Please insult me now. I gotta karmic balance.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I'm having an issue, a lot of the time I also think this is for the learning. I know you've heard me say that last semester. I'm in this class for the learning. So if I'm struggling, I don't immediately get help because I think by working through this myself, I'll become stronger. I'll understand it more deeply. There's some cases where that's, I think, like undeniably true. That is not always the case. There are some problems that get help with. Spend 20 minutes on it, and if it's not obvious, ask somebody.
Right.
And that's also something that I know I got better at over the course of PUI.
Yeah, it's just a question of, it's not that you should make mistakes, but if you know the mistake's about to be made, or if you can avoid making it, do that.
Exactly, yeah. Or even if you've already, like there was a case where I made a mistake, and I immediately went to the manager, I'm like, hey, I messed up. here's what happened, here's why it happened, how should we resolve this, here's what I think the answer would be. And he's like, it's unfortunate it happened, but thank you for being so transparent about it. Let's go forward. And so there was no issue, and the client never had to know, just because of like the stage it was caught at. But because I just went to him immediately and said, this is the way I think we should fix it, he ultimately actually chose a different way that I think made the result better. So if I had tried to hide that myself and just like toil in darkness, then it wouldn't have been good.
Right.
So, yeah, don't do that. Be honest with people. Yeah.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Lastly, I wanted to ask if people are like intrigued by anything that you like spoke about today, or like wanted to ask about like consulting, Sidewalk, like anything like that, or RPGs. Then where can they find you? How can they get in touch with you?
So message me on LinkedIn. I'm the Paul Seufert who doesn't work at Deloitte. There's another one. Yeah, another Paul Seufert in the States.
Amazing.
On Facebook or anything, I don't use my Instagram for anything but memes, so probably not there. But yeah, no, any channel, or come up to me in person. I'm often in the Angelai Common Room.
Gotcha.
Sometimes in the pit. I don't know. Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. We'll link all those resources, including the Paul Seufert and like who is in the States.
I don't know if I could stream my geolocation from my phone, but maybe.
That
it's getting a little far.
A little much, Paul. We need to protect you. You're a valuable resource. But thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for
talking to us. And this has been That Thing I Did for a Year. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.